Director Shin slid the report across the conference table without saying Adese's name. Not once. Adese watched from the far end of the room as 6 weeks of her work, her models, her projections, her footnotes, landed in front of the client under someone else's presentation. She had seen this before. She kept her face still. She kept her pen moving. This was Daesun Capital, 43rd floor, Seoul. And this was Tuesday. Impressive analysis, the client said, nodding at the screen. Whoever built this stress testing framework understood the regional exposure better than most of our internal teams. Director Shin smiled. We have an excellent department. Adese wrote the word excellent in her notebook, underlined it once. Then the client leaned forward. One question on the emerging market weighting, the assumption on page 11. Walk me through the logic. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when 12 people suddenly discover they cannot answer a question about a document they did not write. Adese looked up. The weighting accounts for currency volatility in 3 West African corridors, she said, her voice level, precise, unhurried. The assumption is conservative by design. I can walk you through the full model if you'd like. The client turned toward her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd entered the room. Please. She did. 4 minutes. No notes, no stumble. When she finished, the client said, That's exactly what I needed. Thank you. Director Shin's chair scraped back. She stood slowly, the way people stand when they are deciding how much damage to do. She looked at Adese the way people look at something that has appeared in a place it was not invited. Don't misread the moment, she said, her voice smooth and carrying. She's here on a scholarship program, a diversity initiative, not a hiring decision. She smiled at the client. We find it's important to give these opportunities, even when the fit isn't quite organizational. The room went still. Adese opened her notebook to a fresh page, clicked her pen, and began to write, slowly, carefully, every word Director Shin had just said, while the silence stretched and the fluorescent lights hummed and 12 people waited to see what she would do next. Then she looked up. I just want to make sure I have that correctly recorded, Adese said, her voice carrying the same temperature it had when she explained the currency model. For my files. Director Shin's smile did not move, but something behind her eyes did. The client cleared his throat, and at the back of the room, standing just inside the doorway, holding nothing, saying nothing, in a suit that had not been on any meeting agenda, a man watched Adese cap her pen and close her notebook with the careful, deliberate hands of someone who had learned long ago that falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. He had taken a wrong turn on his way to the 45th floor. He did not leave. Kwon Sojun had spent 15 years learning to read people, to see the exact moment someone broke. He watched Adese Obi not break, and he thought, there she is. That is the most dangerous person in this building, and nobody in this room has any idea. She noticed the shift before she understood it. At 8:47 in the morning, Director Shin's assistant walked past the intern bay at a pace that was almost running. 2 senior analysts who never arrived before 10 were already at their desks, jackets on, screens open. Someone had replaced the dying plant by the elevator with a fresh one. Adese watched all of it from her periphery and returned to her screen. Whatever was happening on the floors above her was not her concern. She had a liquidity analysis due by noon that would be submitted under Park Jin-ho's name, and the models still needed cleaning. She worked. The floor rearranged itself around her in small, anxious movements. She did not look up. She was 3 pages from the end when she felt it, the particular quality of silence that meant someone had stopped walking. She had learned to notice that kind of silence. It usually preceded something unpleasant. What are you building? The voice was quiet, not loud the way authority usually announced itself in this building, just certain. Adese did not look up immediately. Liquidity stress model, 3-scenario framework, Basel III adjusted for regional variance. Which corridors? West and Central Africa, with secondary exposure in Southeast Asia. And the correlation assumptions between the corridor currencies? Are they static or dynamic? She looked up. He was standing at the edge of the intern bay with the relaxed stillness of someone who had nowhere more important to be, which she knew immediately was not true. Dark suit, silver watch. The kind of face that gave away nothing but had clearly decided something. He was not from this floor. He was not from any floor she had access to. Dynamic, she said. Recalibrated quarterly against IMF volatility indices. She held his gaze. Who are you? He reached into his jacket and placed a card on her desk. She read it without touching it first. Kwon So-jun, Executive Director, Kwon Group. She picked it up, read it again, set it back on the desk, and slid it across to him. You're in the wrong part of the building. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more considered than that. Am I? He picked up the card, held her gaze for one moment longer than was necessary. Then he walked back toward the elevator without hurrying, without looking back, with the unhurried ease of a man who had learned that looking back signaled uncertainty he did not feel. Adeze watched the elevator doors close. Then she opened her notebook, took out the card she had palmed before sliding the decoy across the desk, and tucked it between the last two pages. She told herself it meant nothing. A curiosity, a wrong turn. She went back to her model and found the cursor blinking at a line she had no memory of finishing. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. His name was on the meeting request by 9 the following morning. Adeze saw it on the strategy review agenda. Observer, Kwon So-jun, Kwon Group, and said nothing. Che Surim, at the adjacent desk, made a sound that was nearly a word and then abandoned it. The senior analyst spent 40 minutes before the meeting deciding where to sit. Adeze prepared her slides and ate breakfast at her desk. The review went the way reviews always went. She presented the first section. Park Jin-ho interrupted with a clarification that was not a clarification, but a redirect, a technique so practiced it had its own rhythm. Director Shin added context that subtly repositioned the analysis as a team output. A junior associate asked a question clearly scripted to give Shin the floor back. Adeze answered it, returned to her slide, and continued. She had learned to hold her thread through the interference the way you hold an umbrella in wind. Not by fighting it, but by adjusting the angle and keeping moving. So-jun sat at the back and said nothing. He did not look at his phone. He did not look at the senior analysts performing competence in his direction. He watched Adeze present, and when the room interrupted, he watched that too, with the focused patience of someone cataloging information he intended to use. She found the stairwell by instinct afterward, 11 steps down from the main floor, a landing wide enough for a person and a container of jollof rice she had packed at 6 that morning because the break room conversation had a way of ending when she walked in. He appeared 7 minutes later and sat beside her on the step without asking. She did not move over. She did not offer him anything. She waited. Your name on a contract, he said. Your work credited as yours. 3 times your current stipend, and a team that has been told in advance what the standards are. Why? Because you are the best analyst in that building. He said it the way people state weather. Everyone in that building knows it, except the people whose job it is to say so. She studied him for a long moment. The stairwell light was ungenerous. He looked the same in it as he had in the conference room, unbothered by unflattering conditions. She noted that. I don't need to be rescued, she said. I need to be evaluated fairly. I'm offering you both. I'm asking for one. She closed her container. My internship ends in 6 weeks. If the offer still stands when it does, I'll consider it. On my terms. As an equal, not a project. He was quiet. Then, agreed. She did not believe him. She had learned not to believe men who agreed too easily. She returned to her desk. Surim leaned across the partition immediately. Do you know who that was? Yes. And you said no? Adeze opened her model. I said not yet. He came back. Not every day, and never without a reason that would survive scrutiny. A due diligence review on the 3rd week, a board alignment meeting on the 4th, a risk assessment that required, apparently, his personal attendance. Dason's senior staff greeted each visit with the same performance of readiness. Adeze noted his arrivals the way she noted weather. Useful information, filed without sentiment. Their encounters lasted minutes. A corridor, an elevator held open. Once, a question about her West Africa corridor data that she answered in 4 sentences while walking, because she had somewhere to be and she had decided, carefully, not to adjust her pace for him. He never asked her to. The third week, she submitted a report that had been buried for 6 days. By the following morning, it was in Chairman Lim's inbox with a routing note she had not written. The fourth week, a client she had never met requested a follow-up specifically on her emerging markets framework, a client whose file she recognized. He had been redirected away from her work 2 months ago. She had documented it. She was not foolish. She understood systems because she had been processed through enough of them to see their architecture. And when a system that has operated without friction for months begins producing different outputs, something in the input has changed. She found him in the lobby at 9:11 on a Thursday evening, waiting for a car, and she walked directly to him. "You've been interfering." He looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize. Not surprised, because he was never surprised, but something adjacent to satisfied. "I've been correcting errors." "That is not your function here." "It became my function when the errors became deliberate." He held her gaze. "There's a difference between a system that underperforms and a system that is designed to suppress a specific output. You know that distinction better than anyone in this building." The lobby was empty. Their reflections floated in the dark glass of the entrance behind him. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "Specifically, not the professional answer." He was quiet long enough that she began to believe he would not answer. Then, "My father built the Quan Group by making sure no one in any room ever looked too closely at anything. I have spent 12 years learning to look closely at everything." He paused. "You are the most precise thinker I have encountered in this industry. Watching this building waste, that is not something I can observe without acting." She absorbed this. Then, because he had told her something true, she gave him something true in return. "I left Lagos with 1 suitcase and a scholarship letter," she said. "I have been proving I deserve to be in this city every day since I landed. I am very tired of proving it." He said nothing. He did not offer comfort, which was the correct response. She went back upstairs. Sorum looked up from her screen, read Adeze's face with the quiet accuracy of someone who had been watching carefully for weeks, and said only, "Oh. Oh no." The woman arrived on a Tuesday, carrying a document envelope that was clearly a prop. Adeze recognized it immediately. The envelope was unsealed, held at an angle that suggested no one had considered its contents important, and the woman carrying it moved through the intern bay with the unhurried confidence of someone who had not come to deliver anything. She was younger than Sojin, lighter in her expression, and she looked at Adeze the way people look at something they have already decided they like. "Kwan Yeren," she said, sitting in the empty chair beside Adeze's desk without being invited. "I'm the only person in my brother's life who consistently tells him the truth. I thought you should know that before I say anything else." Adeze set down her pen. "What are you here to say?" Yeren smiled. It was a warm smile, but it was also precise. He hasn't taken a personal interest in anything in 4 years. Not a project, not a person, not a meal that wasn't scheduled by his assistant. She set the prop envelope on her knee. He has been to this building 6 times in 5 weeks. Sojin does not do things without reasons, and whatever his reason is, it has nothing to do with Daisen Capital's quarterly returns. "He's made a professional offer," Adeze said. "I haven't accepted it yet." "I know." Yeren looked at her with steady, uncomplicated attention. "I'm not here about the offer." Adeze waited. "He'll wait as long as you ask him to," Yeren said. "That's not a manipulation. It's just true. He's patient in a way that looks like strategy from the outside, but is actually closer to..." She paused, finding the word. "Hope. Which he doesn't have very much of. Which is why I'd rather he didn't spend it waiting indefinitely." She stood, picked up the envelope. "That's all." She left with the same ease with which she had arrived. Sojin appeared 40 minutes later. Adeze suspected the timing was not coincidental, but said nothing about it. She closed her laptop and looked at him directly. "What do you actually want?" she asked. "Not the offer, not the professional answer, the specific thing." He sat down in the same chair his sister had occupied. He was quiet for long enough that she respected it. She had learned his silences were not evasions, but precision, the same way hers were. "To have dinner with someone who speaks to me like I'm a person and not a position," he said. "To have that be the same person consistently." He met her eyes. "To stop constructing reasons to be in this building." She held his gaze for a long moment. Everything in her that had learned to be careful was still being careful, but something underneath it was doing something else entirely. "My internship ends in 3 days," she said. "Ask me again then." He nodded. He left without pushing. Adeze opened her notebook to a fresh page. She did not write down an injustice. She did not document a slight or record a date and time for her files. She wrote one line and sat with it, and did not cross it out. Chairman Lim Do-hwan did not look at her once. He looked at the surface of his desk, at the framed photographs arranged along the windowsill, at the middle distance above her left shoulder where difficult conversations go when the person having them lacks the integrity to aim them correctly. He said cultural integration concerns and long-term team cohesion and not the right moment, and each phrase landed with the soft, practiced weight of words that had been used before and would be used again. He said he hoped she understood. He said the scholarship program had been valuable. He said he wished her well. Adeze thanked him. She stood. She walked out of his office with the same stillness she had carried into every room in this building for 6 months. The stillness that was not peace, but had learned to wear its face. She took the elevator to the lobby, sat in one of the chairs by the entrance that no one ever used, opened her notebook to the last written page, and below everything she had documented, every name, every date, every precise record of what this building had taken from her and called policy, she wrote 4 words. Closed the notebook, put it in her bag. Then she left. 36 hours later, she was in her apartment reading when her phone screen lit with a news alert. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the table and looked at the wall for a moment. Daesun Capital had a new majority stakeholder. The acquisition had been executed through a holding company. The transaction had, apparently, been structured over several weeks. She did not call him. She made tea. She went to bed. Saturday morning, an unknown number. She answered. "Ms. Obi." The voice was professional, unhurried. "This is Baek Min-jae, office of Kwon So-jun. I'm calling to formally extend an offer of employment. Head of Emerging Market Strategy, Kwon Group. Permanent position. The terms Mr. Kwon outlined previously remain unchanged. We'd welcome your response at your earliest convenience." She thanked him and ended the call. Then she found So-jun's number and called it. He answered on the second ring. "You bought the company," she said. "I made a sound investment." So-jun. A pause. Not evasion, precision. "I told you the offer would still stand." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside her window, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did. Moving, indifferent, continuous. She had arrived in this city with one suitcase and a letter, and the determination of someone who had decided that exhaustion was not a reason to stop. She was still tired, but something underneath the tiredness had shifted. "I need to ask you something," she said. "In person." "Tell me where." "I'll come to you." She ended the call, picked up her notebook, read the 4 words she had written in the lobby 2 days ago, standing in a building that had just told her she did not belong there. I was right anyway. She put on her coat and left. In his office on the 47th floor, Kwon So-jun set down his phone and was already reaching for his jacket before she had finished the call. Her name was on the door. Not a nameplate slid into a temporary holder, not a printed card taped at intern badge height. Engraved. Permanent. Adeze Obi, head of Emerging Market Strategy. She had walked past it for 6 months and had not yet stopped finding it remarkable, though she had stopped showing that she found it remarkable, which was a different thing entirely. The work was harder than anything Daesun had given her. Harder in the way that real things are harder than performances of things. She sat in rooms where decisions were made and not merely reported. She was disagreed with directly, which she found she preferred to being ignored. She disagreed back, with data, and was heard. The adjustment had taken 3 weeks. The confidence in being heard had taken longer. She was still, quietly, learning that producing excellent work and then waiting for it to disappear were not inevitably connected. She was not there because of Sojun. This was important to her, and he understood that it was important, which was one of several reasons she had stopped guarding herself against him with quite the same vigilance. The dinners had started as debriefs. His knowledge of regional markets was genuine and useful, and she was too precise to refuse a useful resource simply because it made her pulse unsteady. They became something else gradually, in the way that gradual things happen. Without announcement, without a moment she could have pointed to and said there, that was when. Mornings when his schedule shifted without explanation, and she stopped asking for one because she already knew. Small, unremarkable adjustments that accumulated into a life that had made room for another person without either of them having drafted the terms. They had argued twice. Both times about work, both times seriously, both times resolved without performance or retreat. She had noted this. She was still a person who noted things. On a Thursday in the 7th month, she was at her desk at 9 in the evening with her notebook open when she heard him in the doorway. "You're still here?" "Always." He crossed the room without hurrying. She did not look up immediately. She was finishing a thought, and he knew by now that finishing the thought was not rudeness but respect, because she extended the same courtesy to him. When she looked up, her face was the face she had not shown the conference room, or the stairwell, or the lobby on the evening she had finally said, "I am very tired of proving it." It was the face underneath all of those faces. Unguarded. Certain. She closed the notebook. He sat beside her. In the quiet of the office, with soul spread out behind the glass in all its indifferent luminescence, she turned the notebook over in her hands. The first page was still visible at the edge. Director Shin's words in her precise handwriting recorded the morning this had all begun. And below them, added later in different ink, in handwriting that was the same but somehow less braced against the page, "I wrote this down so I would never forget how far I had to come. I don't need it anymore." She set it down. He did not ask what it said. He already knew. Your excellence was never the problem. You were always the answer. You just needed a room that was finally ready for you.